One thing I learned about as I got older and I was actually out of hockey was coaches' relationships with other teams.
Yeah.
I actually got this from Troy Ryan. He like years later, he's like, "Oh yeah, like every time you ever went up to Miramichi, like I stopped in and just said hey to the other coach. Like the
Yeah.
relationship, it's not a rivalry. It is, but it isn't because you want to talk to the other coaches, talk about the league, see how things are going. Do
Yeah.
you have that relationship with other coaches in the league? And when you went up to Monctonian, did you chat around?
Yeah, so like, the you get to familiar with some guys. A guy who scouts with me in Truro used to be the head coach at Kensington. He's not there anymore. He's with UPEI, but you'd always talk to him. You'd always make sure you go see him. I used to have a buddy, Brad Tasink, who coached the St. John Vito's. So he'd always be around, go get to see those guys. And Steve McPherson in Moncton, they run a great program, so we always run into them, talk shop, how's the year, blah blah. So you do get kind of the coaches, they stick around, so you start to see some familiar faces and you start to talk with some guys. So
What was the topic of conversation this year,
um,
other than COVID?
other than COVID, well, just how are things, right? You haven't seen some guys for 2 years, so it's just how's the year? How are you doing personally? How's your team? What do you like? I talking with the Moncton coach, Steve McPherson. He's the GM of Edmundston. One of our old players, our old captains, Brendan Sibley's there. So I just said, how's Sibs doing in Junior A? Like, there's a lot of connections.
Yeah.
So it's cool to kind of catch up with some of those guys.
When you go up there, do you have the coach hat on? Do you have the scout hat on? Or do you have the JB hockey development hat on? What hat do you wear?
Man, I juggle all three, to be honest.
See, back to my busy. You're busy.
Yeah, different angles, man. I mean, like when our team's at the rink and we're getting ready to play, obviously, it's coach hat. This year with the restrictions, you couldn't really hang around and watch at some of the venues. You had to kind of be in your room, play your game, and then kind of get out. But in previous years, I would stay at the rink. Like I would drive up. I wouldn't take the bus with the team because I knew I'd be at the rink watching other teams and all that. This year it was kind of scouting while coaching. You kind of notice guys that you're playing against, who stood out, those type of things. So it's a little different this year, but typically that's how I would do it. And then, the JV stuff, the prospect game, seeing some of the kids I worked with over the summer, we got to watch the game. It was in the big rink A at the Monctonian, so the stands. So it was nice to kind of watch those guys, kind of get to live a cool hockey moment, right? And, whether you had a small part in it or not, like, it's really cool. So
going back to the Quebec, the what do you call it? The game, the Q game.
Yeah, the Q prospect game.
The Q prospect game. Who decides what kids get to go into that?
Yeah, so I actually have a good insight into this because I used to work for Central Scouting. I used to be the Nova Scotia guy for Central Scouting for the Quebec League. So the way it works is, and my brother Taylor, he's now the Nova Scotia guy. He kind of took my old role. I kind of passed it on to him. Yeah, so he the way it works is you create your list for your region. And, you start to give grades out to kids, right? Like an A grade's round 1 to 2, a B grade's 3 to 4, and so on and so on. And you kind of make like a list of like kids to watch, right? Like I think these are shoo-ins for the prospect game if we're taking, 24 forwards and we're taking, 16D. I think these kids from my region are shoo-ins. Let's watch these guys. And then the way it works is there's about 4 or 5 Quebec guys, and then you get 2 New Brunswick PEI guys, 1 for each province, and you get a Newfoundland guy. So they all come together, they kind of have a meeting, and they sit down and they kind of give you different regions, different kids to watch. So they could give some Nova Scotia kids to the Newfoundland guy, just so there's a different perspective on them. And then for all those scouts, there's 2, heads of the snake, if you will, and they're kind of the final say in it. They're responsible for all the kids. So they do come in with kind of a template for which kids should probably be in the game. And then they kind of, pick and watch some other guys and they make adjustments based on that.
Is there a little like politics involved with it up there?
Yeah.
Because I remember when I went, there was.
Yeah. Being a part of it, I like to say, no, there isn't. It should just be the best kids. But, selfishly, sometimes you throw a kid in there, because you just want to see how he does, Sometimes you try not to take too many from a team, so maybe that limits how many forwards, maybe a good first-year forward gets left out because they took, 3D from a team. I know a few years back, there was like 3 max defensemen got in, but a forward didn't, so just some things like that do happen.
Yeah, but I guess politics are in every
yeah.
aspect of life, not even sport. Just
and it's not the end all be all to be in the game, right? There's kids that do play in that game who don't get drafted, right? There's kids who go up there, have a good weekend, they get put in the prospects game, they don't even get picked, and then opposite of that. Kids who aren't in the game have great seasons, get picked late in the season.
Do you like to preach that to your team?
Yeah, it sounds like you're just trying to say something to make them feel better.
Yeah.
Because a lot of kids are disappointed when they don't get to go in it, but it's just the reality. I mean, a hockey, there's only 40 kids in that game.
Yeah.
And in the Q draft, there's 250 some picks.
True.
So,
I never thought of that. Wow.
And that's from the Atlantic region, right? So I mean, keep your head up. It's just a game. And from the coach's hat, right? Putting them on the coaching hat, it's actually worse when you have more kids in it because it's an extra game that your guys got to play in a grind of a weekend. So like if you have 4 or 5 kids in it, that's 4 or 5 kids on your team that are playing an extra game.
And they're going balls to the wall that game.
Balls to the wall that game, probably harder than they play for you. And, it's just depleting them, right? It catches up, right? When was the last time you played 6 hockey games in 3 days,
It probably will never happen again.
Never happen again, right?